Welcome to Salon Talks. I am Mary Elizabeth Williams. It is already one of the most buzzed about movies of the summer, written by and starring the indomitable Mindy Kaling, along with Emma Thompson, Hugh Dancy. I could go on all day. Like, this cast is off the charts. I want to talk to you about that. And our guest, Reid Scott. Late Night takes a look behind the scenes at a struggling talk show and the comedy writer brought in to shake things up. Reid plays the head writer, monologue writer, Tom Campbell. He's also co-starred on The Big C, the TBS comedy My Boys, and the Emmy, multiple, like, insane numbers of Emmys. Like, oh my God. Like, your star alone has like 8 in a row, I think?
Something like that.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Veep as Dan Egan, as well as movies like Venom. Fantastic. And the upcoming Black and Blue. Hi. So I said I was going to start today with a curse.
Yeah.
I am. But I'm quoting you.
Oh, God.
In the curse. So as Veep was wrapping up, you said, I'm going to miss that asshole.
Yeah.
So I want to know, you played
true.
this asshole for 8 years,
Yeah.
8 seasons. You are not the most likable character in this movie, at least to start.
Mm-hmm.
For a chunk of this movie, you are not the one our sympathies would be with.
No.
Reid, what, like, you are a guy who could do the conventional leading man good guy roles,
thanks.
for sure. What is it about these assholes or seeming assholes that appeals to you?
I don't know. I mean, the as people, they certainly don't appeal to me because they're just horrible. I mean, everyone in Veep, all the characters are just despicable human beings, and that's sort of the point. So I've probably been typecast a little bit in that, you know, you need someone to play the privileged white prick. It's like
Mindy Kaling reached out to you for this.
she did, yeah. I think she thought about, you know, how many privileged white pricks did she know? She said, you got to get Reid.
So you're Hollywood's go-to.
I guess so. I'm carving out my own little niche. I think it's fun. When I first, you know, was studying theater and film, I was always drawn to the villain. I always thought, I never really wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be a director, and I was writing. And I had this amazing professor who said, you should really try acting. That way you know what it is you're asking your actors to do. And one of the first plays that I tried, and I'm sure I was terrible, was Miss Julie. And I played Jean in Miss Julie, who's just, you know, he's much like Dan. He's conniving, backstabbing, two-faced, the whole thing. And I loved it, just because partially the catharsis that you get out of doing things on stage or on camera that you would never do in your real life. But the villain was a place for me to sort of hide. You know, it was so fun to put on a character that felt so different than myself, and I don't know. It was just I got hooked. So every time a villain or a bad guy came up, it's like I want that part. I want that part, because you lose yourself and you really sort of. That's when the magic happens for me, is when you really lose yourself in a part. And with something like Dan, I mean, he's just, there's nobody worse. There's just nobody worse. He's so awful, to the point where I actually didn't like him there for a while.
But if you're going to do a competition with the characters on Veep, it's
Yeah,
hard to say. Like, who would you say is the worst? Like, you can't.
Someone put out a list.
Like, I would say,
Yeah.
like, I mean, Selena
Yeah.
is the worst.
She's the worst. And I forget who did it. Someone put out a list ranking everyone in.
You'd be very high up.
I think I was number 2, which I was very proud.
I was going to say you would definitely be like extremely high up
thank
there.
you.
And yet your character also got to develop. Like, you changed. I mean, it's not like you just are bad people and you stay bad people for 8 years. You really also all went on these different journeys and had real character development, and your character got to get kicked down a lot.
He got kicked down a lot, yeah,
but
which was
still
fun.
Asshole. But
still asshole, man. You can't keep a good asshole down.
That is the lesson. So this movie. So in Late Night, you're a different kind of asshole.
Yeah.
You're kind of what those of us who do hot takes point to and say, this is the problem.
Yep.
This is the problem. This guy who is Ivy League, product of nepotism, wants to try to keep that nepotism going. He's the problem.
Exactly right. Yeah.
How do you prepare for something like this? Because you've also been in that world of late night. You've done a million talk shows. You've been backstage. Do you just go up to other white guys and say, like, you seem like you might be the problem? Like, how do you prepare for
You
something?
seem like a dick. Can I interview you for a minute? It was really fun. So working on a show like Veep, they're connected in a way. The writers' room in Veep is like murderer's row of comedy writers, and a lot of the writers came from late night or sketch comedy, Saturday Night Live. So I've had a lot of access to those sort of personalities. No one on our writing staff at Veep was anywhere close to as horrible as Tom started out, but because we had a really unusual relationship, like oftentimes in television, the writers are sort of one camp and the actors are another camp, but we are very collaborative, so I had a lot of access to the writers' room, and I got to be very friendly with a lot of these guys and girls. And when I got the part of Tom, I told Mindy I'm sort of basing it on a few different personality types that I've seen, and she actually knew some of these writers too. She's like, oh my God, that's perfect. He's a lot like that guy with a mix of this and a mix of that. And then also coming from Dan, I basically just had to tone Dan down a little bit, which was nice. I just had to give him a soul, you know.
Right, you do get to, like, you're a guy who cares about his brother, who like cares about his family.
Yeah, he's a real guy. He's just out of touch. I think Dan, you know, is looking for a way to sort of get the angle or get something over on someone, whereas Tom was someone who's just been blissfully existing in this bubble of privilege his entire life, and is very comfortable. I mean, who wouldn't be comfortable in that little, you know, insulated, furry, you know, Ivy League bubble? So when Mindy's character comes along, it really shakes it up, and I think he's caught off guard by it. You know, sort of despite himself feeling that I'm sure he, you know, considers himself to be liberal and considers himself to be, you know, open, and he writes comedy, and he works on a show run by the only woman in late night comedy. So he probably thinks of himself as pretty progressive, and then when he's really put to it, he finds that he's not, and it turns his world upside down.
Yeah, and you will never find anyone who was a nepotism hire who doesn't say, like, but I worked for this.
Totally. Oh my God.
That never,
yeah,
ever
sure.
happens. So, yeah, you're playing this character who is a writer on a show headed by Emma Thompson, who is herself an Oscar-winning screenwriter.
She's amazing.
Not too shabby,
Yeah.
right? Not too shabby. And I was surprised at how serious this film gets. Like, it comes at you as a comedy and then sort of stealthily gets pretty dark.
Yeah, it was something that we talked a lot about while we were making the movie. The cast is incredible, top to bottom, and one thing that we discovered that we all had in common is, you know, this is an Indian movie. This wasn't, you know, I think everyone is just blown away and very pleasantly surprised by all the success it's having, even at this early stage. But we all gravitated to the film because it was honest and it was funny, and that's kind of it. There was a message there, yes, but I don't think, and I think Mindy would back me up on this, is that the point wasn't to lean into the message. This is just her story. This is just how it went down for her. She was the only female writer in a room full of men on The Office, and that's very difficult, and she overcame hurdle after hurdle after hurdle. But the movie never gets preachy. It's just honest. It's just genuine. And the moments that it gets very serious, again, I think are just born out of that honesty. Like, this is just how it happened. It wasn't trying to sell, you know, a message or, you know, start a movement. It's just an honest reflection of the workplace in Hollywood.
Right, and that's I think what makes it so compelling, is that it is not like it's not, you know, a very special episode of something. It's just telling a story, but it's telling a story that not everyone has heard.
That's very true.
And it's also not just about race, it's about sexism, it's about ageism. I was really impressed that it really goes there with Emma Thompson as a woman in her late 50s, at the top of her game in many ways.
Being pushed out
for I think you and Ike Barinholtz's characters really represent sort of the worst.
Thank you.
But he is like the actual worst.
He is, yeah.
Because his character is that guy
just so irreverent.
Who is like a real fixture in the comedy world as well. That guy who like can say anything.
Totally.
And just
shock jock.
Right.
Basically.
Which not only is a thing, but is now becoming a reaction.
I agree.
In response to things like Me Too. So you, however, you are in your real life seeming like a very nice man.
Well, thank you.
Maybe you are an asshole. I don't know. Like, it seems like you're not.
Probably in there somewhere.
But you can't be that much of an asshole because you seem to repeatedly, from the beginning of your career, gravitate towards projects that are very diverse casts, that are very female-driven, and that are really ensembles.
Mm-hmm.
That takes a certain kind of player.
Oh. Wow.
To be in that world.
Yeah.
Like, you are not the guy who wants to be necessarily like always vying for the #1 spot.
No.
You're part of a group, and you're part of a group where the focus is usually on a woman.
And I love that. And it's sort of, you know, my parents deserve a lot of credit. My parents are very progressive, liberal people. My mom is a very strong woman. Her mom, my grandmother, is also, I mean, she's the toughest Irish broad you're ever going to meet. My dad's mother was the first female English professor at Syracuse University and had a very influential hand in raising me. I lived with her in the summers and just would read every book in her house.
And you went to Syracuse.
And I went to Syracuse because of her. And so I've always had really wonderful women in my life, strong, intelligent, tough women. You know, my mom marched on Washington for Roe v. Wade. I mean, they walked the walk. And so early on in my career, when jobs came up, again, because I think maybe because I wanted to be a director, and I like taking the sort of macro view of things instead of the micro. I just wanted to be part of like the best team. Like, who's going to put together the best story? Who's going to assemble the best cast? And what's going to be the most fun? And I really, try to sort of take my own, every actor has a bit of an ego, but I really try to keep that in check and just say, what's the best story to tell? And fortunately, in a way, unfortunately, but also fortunately. Unfortunately, we still live in a time where these stories are very few and far between. Fortunately for myself, I've been able to be part of these stories. So yeah, working on the Big C with Laura Linney and Veep with Julie Louis-Dreyfus, and now Late Night with Emma and Mindy, I've had a blast working with strong, intelligent women. It's fun. It's fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
It doesn't have to be any more than that.
On
It's just
behalf
fun.
of women, thank you. It's nice when men want to work with women.
Yeah.
It's still actually kind of a big deal.
So I like learning things along. Like, you don't want to do a project just because it's a paycheck or whatever. Like, you're trying to grow as an artist and thereby hopefully grow as a human being too. That's why artists are involved in artistic endeavors. So you try to go against the grain, do something different, take yourself out of your comfort zone, mix it up.
Well, okay, so to that, you're not someone who came up through like the UCB world. You're not like someone who seemingly aspired to a comic career. And yet...
I was terrified of it.
And yet here you are.
Yeah.
Here you are, where you are really known for a long and very prestigious career in comedy, even the Big C. Mm-hmm. Very comedic. Huh?
Yeah.
So first of all, Second of all, do you think that is your way into these serious issues? Because it feels like everything that you've done is also really, there is a very dark side as well. There is even in Late Night, there is darkness there. There is a scandal, is, without giving it away, there is a lot that really the characters have to, there's health issues, there's a lot that the characters have to grapple with that is very dark.
Yeah.
And the medium of comedy.
I've learned to love it. I think, I've always enjoyed comedy. There's something really wrong with you if you don't enjoy comedy, which I think there are people out there. I remember meeting somebody, I said, what kind of music do you listen to? He's like, I don't really care for music. It's like, how do you not like music? But whatever.
Wait, what?
I still don't understand that. But with comedy, my dad he's a huge cinephile. So growing up, he showed me everything. And the comedies, my dad has a very haughty laugh, and when he would get going, I was like, okay, even if I don't understand this is funny. So I always had an eye out for comedy, but I was under the impression that to work in comedy in Hollywood, you had to be a comic. I thought everyone that was in a comedy, like you said, sort of came up through either stand-up or some sort of improv background, and I had none of that. I was always sort of in awe of comedy. And I booked my first job. It was a pilot that didn't end up getting picked up, and it was a comedy. And when I got the job, I remember my first instinct was, awesome, I got a job. And my second instinct was, oh no, they're going to find out that I'm not really a comic and I'm going to get fired and my career is going to be over before it ever started. So I had no choice but to just overcommit to the comedy. And it worked somehow. And then that sort of, as these jobs go, one leads to another, leads to another. And before I knew it, I was working mostly in comedy. But I've learned to really appreciate what comedy can do when there is a message there. I love how comedy can diffuse the situation to the point where the audience then becomes vulnerable enough to let the message in. When you go to see a comedy in the theater, one like Late Night, you're leaning back in your chair, you want to be entertained, you want to laugh. I really do think that you open yourself up in a way to a comedy that you wouldn't if you know this is a hard, boiled movie about this issue. You sort of you tense up and you approach the material differently. With comedy, I think it burrows in sort of surreptitiously in a way that you might not know. So you walk away from it saying, I feel good, I laughed, which is so cathartic, and I learned something as well. And that sounds so, kind of, apple pie in the sky, but I think it really works. And we're seeing it with this. It's getting people to talk about these issues in a way that, they might not otherwise. I think more people will go to see this movie and get the lesson because it's a comedy than they would if they just saw, oh, it's an angry movie about, gender disparity in the workplace. I don't think you get the same audience, but this way, I think people are going to find it.
It's in a different way than if it were a December movie.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
Totally.
It's got a completely different kind of take. And yet, when you were promoting Venom, your catharsis, I heard, is horror.
Oh, I love it.
You love horror. You love horror. You love like comic books, and you love horror movies.
Absolutely.
And your happy place is horror.
Yeah, it is. I grew up, the George Romero era of comedy, the Sam Raimi era, of horror, the Sam Raimi era of horror. There's so much comedy baked into it. Being scared and laughing are so connected in general, but especially for me.
So like the Evil Dead movies.
Oh, I loved it. I mean, there's no better way than the best kind of horror movies bring you to that point where you're going to scream and then they deliver a laugh. And I discovered that early on, and I love the thrill of being scared, and then I love the intelligence of how do you work something funny into such a dire situation, like zombies eating your brains or whatever. Like, how do you make that funny? And I loved it. And Venom was great. Ruben Fleischer, the director, called me up, and he's a big comedy guy, and he loved Veep, and he said, "This is what we want. We want to bring some funny to Venom." I was like, "Man, I'm your guy," and it was fun. And Tom Hardy was. I don't think people realize how funny Tom Hardy actually is. He's a cut up, and he was totally down to play around. It was really great.
It's really, and it's a love story.
Yeah,
it's a love story between Venom and himself, but also you and him.
Oh yeah. That was we sort of Ruben and I talked about that early on, that there was sort of two ways to play the character of Dr. Dan, because I only play people named Dan.
It's in your contract.
Yeah, it's in my contract. It should be. One was that, it was the typical sort of, the two macho guys butting heads and fighting over the girl that they both love, and that seems so uninteresting to us because you've seen it a million times, and then it makes the woman powerless, and that's just no fun. And it's like Michelle Williams is like, you don't make Michelle Williams powerless. She's another incredibly powerful woman. So we wanted to do something different. So I said, well, what if Dr. Dan just thinks that Tom Hardy's character Eddie is just great, and has kind of a man crush on him and is sort of in awe of him all the time. And then what does that do to Tom's character? It sort of puts him on the back foot, because how do you dislike someone who so clearly likes you so much? And it made for this really kind of funny dynamic, which I think worked.
Yeah, it's a big part of the charm of the movie,
yeah.
And a big part of the charm of you in general, Reid. Thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today.
you.
The movie, again, is called Late Night. It is an absolute delight, especially for those of us who are still a little bit in Veep withdrawal. I'm not going to lie. I still get the shakes a little bit.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you. Thank you.